The night was dark, colder than anyone remembered. At the secret military base hidden deep in the mountains, lights blinked quietly across the runways. Most of the base was asleep, but a few officers were still awake, whispering in small groups. Rumors had begun to spread. A new jet had arrived. A jet so strange and unusual that no one could understand its purpose. "Did you see it? That plane looks like a toy," one pilot whispered, shaking his head. "No way it can survive a real battle." Laughter followed. In the hangar, the young pilots leaned against the walls, smirking and exchanging jokes. The toy jet, as they called it, was small, sleek, and unlike anything they had ever seen. Its shape seemed strange, almost futuristic, and its surface reflected the dim lights like black glass. Most pilots had already written it off, calling it useless and too risky. But one person did not laugh. One young pilot stood in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the jet. His name was Lieutenant David Turner, barely 25, but already known for his courage in the field. He had spent months studying the jet, training secretly, learning every detail about its engine, its controls, and the secret technology it carried. David knew what others could not see. This jet, small as it looked, had unbelievable speed and power. It could outrun anything the enemy had. David walked slowly toward the jet, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He ran his hand over the smooth surface. The others continued to laugh behind him, unaware of the truth. "It's just a toy," one pilot muttered. David said nothing. He had learned long ago that words were useless here. Actions would speak louder. Suddenly, a shrill sound pierced the quiet night. David froze. The radar screens in the control room flickered with red blips. A line of enemy missiles was heading straight for the base. Panic spread quickly. Officers shouted orders and alarms rang out across the hangars. The pilots who had been laughing moments ago now ran in every direction, trying to prepare for the attack. David's heart pounded, but he stayed calm. He knew this was the moment that would show the world what the jet could do. The missiles were fast, deadly, and precise. If the jet did not take off soon, the base would be destroyed and many lives would be lost. He climbed into the cockpit, sliding into the seat with practiced ease. The jet seemed alive beneath him, humming softly, waiting. The other pilots watched in disbelief. "That thing can't escape missiles," one muttered. "It's going to get destroyed." David ignored them. He had no time for doubt. He gripped the controls, his fingers steady despite the tension in the air. Outside, the sky was quiet and still, the calm before the storm. Suddenly, the missiles appeared on the horizon, bright red trails slicing through the darkness. The base shook as the first blast hit nearby targets. David's eyes narrowed. He pressed a button on the console, activating the jet's secret engines. The small plane roared to life, faster than anyone thought possible. Its black surface seemed to disappear in the night as it shot forward, lifting gracefully into the sky. The base erupted into chaos as the other pilots scrambled. "It's flying. How is it flying so fast?" one shouted, his voice trembling. The jet rose higher, dodging the first missile. Then another appeared. And another. David turned the controls with precision, weaving the jet through the sky like a dancer. Each movement was perfect, calculated, and daring. The missiles chased him, but they could not catch him. The jet was too fast, too smart, too advanced. Below, the officers stared at the radar, unable to believe what they were seeing. The missiles exploded harmlessly behind the jet, leaving trails of fire in the night sky. David's lips curved into a small, determined smile. He knew this was only the beginning. He had survived the first attack, but the enemy would not give up easily. They would come back stronger, faster, and more determined. Yet, in that moment, David felt a surge of confidence. He had proven even to himself that the jet was no joke. It was a weapon, a marvel of engineering, and most importantly, it could save lives. He glanced back at the base, tiny lights twinkling below, and knew that tonight, his secret jet had made the impossible possible. As the jet soared through the sky, David whispered quietly to himself, "Everyone thought it was a joke, but tonight the joke might save lives." And for the first time, those who had mocked him began to wonder if they had been wrong. Very wrong. The morning sun rose slowly over the secret military base, painting the hangars with streaks of orange and gold. The events of last night still lingered in the minds of everyone at the base. Pilots who had laughed at the toy-like jet now whispered nervously to each other. Some refused to even look at it. How could a plane so small and fragile outmaneuver missiles that even the fastest fighters couldn't escape? Inside the hangar, Lieutenant David Turner prepared for the day. He moved calmly around the jet, checking every panel, every control, every secret compartment. He had spent months alone in the hangar, learning its secrets, pushing the limits of its engines, and discovering features that no one else could imagine. Every move he made seemed small, simple, but each one was part of a bigger plan. A group of senior officers entered, their faces serious. Colonel Matthews, a tall man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Turner," he said, "last night was remarkable. But we need proof. Today you will take the jet on a test mission. Enemy radar simulations, evasive maneuvers, everything. If it works as you claim, maybe, just maybe, we will believe you." David nodded. He knew this was not just a test of the jet but of himself. "Understood, sir," he said, his voice calm. Inside, though, his heart beat faster. Every test, every mission could mean life or death. The other pilots crowded near the hangar doors, watching with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "You think he'll survive this?" one whispered. "That plane isn't made for real battle," another scoffed. David ignored them. Words had never mattered. Actions would show the truth. Minutes later, the jet's engines roared to life. The sound was unlike anything the pilots had heard before, smooth, powerful, and almost alive. The small plane lifted gently into the sky, almost as if it were floating rather than flying. David guided it past the base, climbing higher into the clouds. The first part of the mission was simple reconnaissance, but the real challenge came when the simulation radar showed incoming enemy targets. Missiles appeared on the screens, dozens of them, fast and deadly. The ground crew's eyes widened in panic. The pilots whispered prayers under their breath. Even Colonel Matthews looked tense. David didn't flinch. He had memorized every maneuver, every trick the jet could perform. The first missile streaked toward him, a bright line cutting through the sky. With a gentle twist of the controls, the jet dipped, rolled, and shot upward at impossible speed. The missile exploded harmlessly behind him. The second missile followed almost immediately. David twisted again, this time sideways, and then dove through a narrow canyon that seemed far too tight for any plane to pass. Below, the other pilots gasped. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were seeing. "It's impossible, he's dodging them all," one muttered. The jet moved with a grace and speed that made it seem almost magical, impossible to track, almost untouchable. Then came the surprise. The radar displayed an incoming swarm of smaller, faster missiles, designed to overwhelm any aircraft. David's eyes narrowed. He activated the jet's secret countermeasures, small, nearly invisible flares and energy pulses that disrupted the missile's guidance systems. One by one, the missiles spiraled out of control, exploding in clouds of fire and smoke far behind him. For a moment, silence fell over the base. The hangar doors were wide open, officers frozen in disbelief, pilots staring at the radar. The small, toy-like jet had done what no one thought possible. But David knew this was only the beginning. The real enemy was not the simulations. It was out there waiting. And now, the test had shown everyone exactly what the jet could do. It was fast, deadly, and unpredictable. It could outsmart any missile, outrun any fighter, and survive situations that would have destroyed ordinary planes. Suddenly, the jet sensors picked up an unexpected signal. Not part of the simulation, real, moving fast and closing in. David's hands tightened on the controls. He realized that the base might already be in danger again. Without hesitation, he pushed the jet to its limits, performing maneuvers so sharp and daring that even the most experienced pilots on the ground couldn't imagine them. Back at the base, Colonel Matthews spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I don't know what we've built, but it's more than a plane. It's extraordinary." The other officers nodded in agreement, though some still looked doubtful. They had witnessed the impossible. As the jet returned to the base, gliding smoothly onto the runway, David climbed out, his face calm but his mind alert. The other pilots gathered around, silent now, no laughter in their eyes. They looked at the jet with a mixture of fear and awe. The toy was no longer a joke. It was a weapon, a marvel, a mystery that they did not yet understand, but one that would change everything. David knew this was only the start. The enemy would not wait. They would come again, faster and stronger. And when they did, he and his secret jet had to be ready. He walked past the gathered officers and pilots, not saying a word. Sometimes words weren't needed. Action spoke louder. The jet sat behind him, small, sleek, and quiet as if resting, but David knew it was ready. Ready for the next challenge, ready to defy what the world thought was possible. And deep inside he smiled. The world had mocked him, the other pilots had laughed. But soon everyone would see. This jet was unlike anything they had ever imagined. And its story was only beginning. The base was quiet after the morning test flight, But David Turner knew calm moments were dangerous. The enemy would not wait. He sat in the small briefing room, looking at the maps spread across the table. Red markers showed enemy positions, patrols, and missile launch zones. The officers discussed strategy in low voices, but their eyes kept flicking toward him. "He's too young," whispered one of the pilots behind him. "No one can survive that out there." David didn't turn. He had heard the whispers before. Age and experience meant little against courage, skill, and technology. And his jet had more than all three. Colonel Matthews spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Lieutenant Turner, your mission is simple and deadly. You are to fly deep into enemy territory, gather intelligence, and, if necessary, evade any threats. Your success will prove this jet is more than we ever imagined." David nodded. "Understood, sir." Inside, he felt the familiar mix of excitement and tension. This was the first real mission, the first test under fire. He had trained for simulations, but now it was the enemy, real and dangerous, waiting for him. The jet roared to life on the runway, black and sleek against the early morning light. Engineers checked the controls one last time, but David already knew every inch of the plane. He climbed into the cockpit and strapped in. The instruments glowed softly, almost like a heartbeat. He whispered, "Let's see what you can do." The jet lifted off, climbing high into the sky. Below, the base watched, tense but amazed. The enemy territory spread out ahead, forests, rivers, and mountains hiding radar stations and missile silos. Every moment counted. David had to stay sharp. One mistake, one miscalculation, and he could be lost forever. The first signs of trouble came quickly. Enemy radar picked up a small blip, a fighter jet heading directly for him. David's hands moved smoothly over the controls. He dove toward a canyon, the enemy fighter following. Missile trails appeared behind the plane, glowing bright against the dark ground. David's heart raced, but his mind was calm. The jet had features no one else knew about. Small flares shot from the wings, confusing the missile sensors. Energy pulses disrupted the fighter's targeting system. One by one, the missiles exploded harmlessly behind him. The enemy pilot cursed over the radio, but David didn't respond. He had no time. He rolled, flipped, and climbed, using every secret maneuver he had practiced. The fighter followed, but it could not keep up. In seconds, the enemy disappeared into the clouds, baffled. David's mind raced. This was only the beginning. More enemies would come, and they would not give up easily. He pushed the jet faster, skimming mountains and dodging radar detection. Suddenly, a swarm of enemy missiles appeared from different directions. It was a trap, designed to overwhelm any pilot. David's eyes narrowed. He activated the jet's secret propulsion system, increasing speed beyond what anyone thought possible. The jet twisted and turned in the sky, weaving between missiles as if dancing with danger. On the ground, officers stared at the radar screens, disbelief etched on their faces. "How is he still alive?" one muttered. "No plane can do that." But the jet did more than survive. It struck back. David released small countermeasures, tiny but deadly, that intercepted some of the missiles. Others exploded harmlessly in the distance. The enemy fighter jets were left confused, struggling to track the small black shadow that moved faster than thought possible. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat ran down David's face, but he never faltered. He knew one mistake would end everything. One wrong maneuver and he would be history. But every move he made was precise, calculated, daring. The jet performed perfectly, almost as if it could think on its own. Finally, the skies cleared. The enemy had retreated, defeated, and bewildered. David flew back toward the base, heart still pounding but with a growing sense of pride. The impossible had been done. The secret jet had survived its first real mission, dodged deadly missiles and outsmarted enemy fighters. Back on the runway, the jet landed smoothly, like a shadow settling on the ground. The engineers and officers ran to meet him, awe written on every face. Even the skeptical pilots could not hide their amazement. Colonel Matthews looked at him with new respect. "Lieutenant Turner, that was unbelievable. You and that jet, you've done the impossible." David stepped out of the cockpit, sweat on his brow, heart still racing. He gave no words, only a small, confident smile. The jet had proved itself, and so had he. But he knew the victory was only temporary. The enemy would return, stronger, smarter, more determined. And when they did, the real challenge would begin. As the sun rose higher, David glanced at the horizon, thinking of the battles to come. The jet had shown its power, but the war was far from over. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "This is only the beginning, and they are not ready for what's coming." The base buzzed with excitement and tension. A small plane once laughed at had just rewritten the rules of war. And in the shadows, enemies already plotted their next strike, unaware that a legend had begun in the sky above them. The victory had been short-lived. The base was alive with whispers and anxious glances. David Turner's mission had shocked everyone, but it had also sent a clear message to the enemy: their old tactics would not work anymore. Somewhere, far beyond the mountains, enemy commanders had already begun planning their response. In a dark, smoke-filled room, high-ranking enemy officers pounded their fists on the table. "The boy and his jet cannot be allowed to survive," one shouted. "They mock us with a single plane." Another officer, older and colder, spoke with measured anger. "It is no longer enough to attack lightly. We must strike with everything we have: missiles, fighters, sabotage teams. That jet will be destroyed before it flies again." Back at the base, life seemed to continue normally. Engineers checked other planes, officers discussed strategies, and pilots prepared for routine exercises. But David could feel the tension in the air. Something was coming, and he had a sense it would be worse than anything he had faced. He stood near his jet, running his hands over the smooth black surface. The plane sat quietly in the hangar, gleaming in the morning light. "Ready for the next challenge," David whispered. The jet had survived simulations and enemy fighters, but real war was different. Now the enemy knew it existed. Now they would come prepared. The first signs of danger appeared subtly. A fuel line was slightly loose, a minor electrical fault in the control panel. Small things, almost invisible, but David noticed them immediately. Someone had tampered with the jet. Sabotage. He called the engineers over, carefully inspecting every panel, every wire. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the truth. The enemy had sent agents, hidden, skilled, and fast, to damage the jet before it could be used again. If he hadn't noticed, the next flight could have been a disaster. Colonel Matthews approached, his expression a mix of worry and determination. "Turner, we've detected unusual activity near the base. Surveillance cameras show movement where no one should be. The enemy may be planning something bigger, something that could endanger everyone." David nodded, his mind already racing. "Then we stay ready. I'll take the jet for a flight tonight, test every system, and see if it can still perform." Night fell again, thick and heavy. The wind whispered through the mountains and the stars hid behind clouds. David climbed into the cockpit, heart steady but senses sharp. This was not a simulation. This was real. The enemy would strike and he had to be ready. As the engines roared to life, the ground crew watched tensely. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every movement potentially dangerous. David lifted off, the jet climbing quickly into the darkness. The first part of the flight was routine checks, maneuvers, engine tests, radar scans. But then an unexpected blip appeared on the radar. Missiles. Real ones. Multiple incoming, heading straight for the jet. Not a test, not a simulation, real death streaking through the night sky. David's hands gripped the controls. He activated the jet's secret systems, engines screaming as the plane shot upward, dodging, weaving, twisting. Missiles exploded behind him in bright flashes. Suddenly, another problem appeared. The jet's left wing experienced a minor malfunction, a result of the earlier sabotage. The plane tilted dangerously. David gritted his teeth and corrected the balance using emergency controls, feeling the strain on both himself and the jet. Every second mattered. One more mistake and it could be over. Meanwhile, on the base, alarms screamed. Officers and engineers ran toward control panels, monitoring the jet. "He's in real trouble," someone shouted. "If that jet fails, we're finished." David's mind raced, but he never panicked. He knew the jet better than anyone. He pushed it to its limits, performing maneuvers so sharp that the missiles could not follow. He activated hidden countermeasures, flares and pulses, breaking the enemy's guidance systems. One by one, the missiles exploded in harmless fireballs far behind him. Even with sabotage and enemy fire, the jet held steady. David's eyes narrowed as he detected more incoming threats, enemy fighters approaching rapidly from the horizon. This was no longer a test. It was a full assault. He adjusted the controls, twisting and rolling, using mountains and clouds to hide, making impossible maneuvers look effortless. The enemy pilots grew frustrated, unable to track the small black shadow that moved faster than any of them expected. By the time he returned to the base, the sky was calm again as if nothing had happened. The jet landed smoothly, gliding onto the runway like a shadow settling on the earth. Officers and engineers rushed over, faces pale with disbelief. Colonel Matthews stepped forward, shaking his head. "Turner, I don't know how you did it. The sabotage, the missiles, you survived them all. David climbed out, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the jet, then at the officers and pilots around him. They're coming again, he said simply. And next time, it won't just be missiles or sabotage. They'll bring everything. No one laughed this time. No one doubted him. The enemy had shown their hand and the war was escalating. What David had done tonight was incredible, but it was only the beginning. The secret jet was no longer just a weapon, it was a target. And the enemy would stop at nothing to destroy it. As the night settled over the base, David walked past the jet, calm but alert. Somewhere out there the enemy was planning, plotting, preparing for the ultimate strike. And David knew, deep in his heart, that the next battle would be even more dangerous, even more daring. The shadow of war loomed larger than ever, and the small, sleek jet was at the center of it all. The sky over the mountains darkened with the coming storm, both in clouds and in war. David Turner sat in the cockpit of his secret jet, the black plane gleaming under the fading sunlight. He knew what was coming. The enemy had gathered everything they had: fighter jets, missiles, and artillery. They were coming for him, for the jet, for the base. And this time there would be no simulations, no small tests. It was real. The base had been warned. Officers scrambled, soldiers took positions, and engineers prepared emergency defenses. But all eyes were on the sky, waiting for the first sign of the attack. The wind carried a tense silence, broken only by the low hum of David's engines. He adjusted the controls, checking fuel, systems, and weapons. This was not just another flight. This was a battle for survival. Suddenly radar screens lit up. A swarm of enemy jets approached from the east, sleek, fast, and deadly. Behind them missile trails streaked across the sky. David's heart pounded, but his mind was calm. He had trained for this. He had survived simulations, sabotage, and ambushes. Now he would face the real test. He pushed the throttle forward, and the jet shot into the clouds, disappearing from sight. Enemy fighters tried to follow, but David's jet moved faster than anyone expected. He dove through canyons, rolled sharply, and climbed in impossible angles. Missiles exploded behind him, bright fireballs against the dark sky. The enemy was relentless. More fighters appeared, trying to corner him from above, below, and both sides. David activated the jet's secret countermeasures, releasing flares, electronic pulses, and sudden bursts of speed. The enemy missiles, precise and deadly, all failed to hit. Each maneuver he made was sharper, smarter, and faster than anything they anticipated. Then came the chaos. The enemy sent a formation of the fastest fighters, almost like a net, to trap him. David's eyes narrowed. He had no choice but to push the jet to its limits. He twisted and turned, rolling through the sky with impossible precision. The jet darted between mountains, climbed vertically, and dove at dizzying speeds. One by one the enemy fighters struggled to keep up, crashing into clouds, turning too late, or firing missiles that missed completely. Below, the radar screens at the base were full of flashing warnings. Colonel Matthews and the officers held their breath, watching David's movements. "He's unbelievable," one whispered. "How is one plane doing all of this?" But the enemy was not done. From a hidden valley, long-range missiles were fired. David saw them approaching, glowing trails against the dark sky. He activated the jet's hidden engines, a secret burst of speed that doubled its normal velocity. The missiles tried to adjust, but it was too late. They exploded harmlessly behind him. The jet responded like an extension of David himself. Every turn, every roll, every climb was perfect. He became a shadow in the sky, untouchable, unpredictable. Even the enemy ace pilots, some of the best in the world, could not track him. The small toy-like jet had become a nightmare for anyone who tried to catch it. But David was not only surviving, he was taking control. Using hidden weapon systems, he disabled some enemy planes, sending them tumbling down in sparks and smoke. The enemy pilots were stunned. Their formation broke apart. Confusion spread through their ranks. The sky, which had been full of chaos and danger, was now David's domain. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Missiles, fighters, countermeasures, evasive maneuvers. David moved through it all like a storm. Every second was life or death, every decision mattered. And yet he never hesitated. He had trained for this moment, and the jet had been built for it. Together they were unstoppable. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only minutes, the enemy began to retreat. Their jets pulled back, missiles spent, formations broken, morale shattered. David watched them go, soaring high in the sky, every fiber of his body alert. He had won this battle, but he knew the war was far from over. When he returned to the base, the runway glowed under the landing lights. The jet touched down smoothly, engines humming quietly, almost as if it were resting after a long dance in the sky. Ground crews rushed to meet him, awe written on every face. Pilots who had laughed at the jet were silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Engineers and officers shook their heads in wonder. Colonel Matthews stepped forward, face pale but proud. "Lieutenant Turner, you've done it. The impossible, you've done it." David climbed out, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline, his face calm but eyes sharp. He looked at the black jet, gleaming under the lights, silent but powerful. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "They will come back. Stronger. Smarter. And next time, it will be even harder." The base was safe for now. But in the shadows, beyond the mountains, enemy commanders were already plotting. They had witnessed a force they could not ignore. One young pilot and his small, secret jet had changed the rules of engagement forever. David walked past the jet, calm but alert. He knew the next battle would be closer, deadlier, and more dangerous. But he also knew that the jet was ready. Together they had survived the impossible, and together they would face whatever came next. The legend of the toy-like jet had begun, and the world would never be the same. The base was buzzing with a mix of excitement and tension. David Turner had survived impossible odds, outmaneuvered enemy jets, and proved the power of his secret jet. But the thrill of victory was short-lived. Somewhere within the base, a shadow was moving, someone who did not want the jet to succeed. David had sensed it before: small inconsistencies in the schedules, unusual access to the hangar, subtle tampering that he had barely noticed. But now the signs were impossible to ignore. Someone inside the base was working against them. Someone had betrayed them. He moved quietly through the hangar, eyes scanning every corner. His jet sat in the center, sleek and silent, but his mind was racing. Every officer, every pilot, every engineer now seemed a possible suspect. Trust was fragile, and in war, betrayal could be deadly. Colonel Matthews approached him, concern etched into his face. "Turner, I don't want to alarm you, but there are reports of unauthorized access. Security cameras show someone entering the jet's hangar at night." David's eyes narrowed. "Do we know who?" "Not yet," Matthews said. "But we need to be cautious. If they reveal the jet's location, the enemy could strike at any moment." David nodded. His instincts told him the enemy would not attack directly. They would use deception, sabotage, and betrayal to gain the advantage. And someone inside the base was helping them. That night, David returned to the cockpit, testing every system carefully. Every panel, every wire, every engine function was inspected. The sabotage attempts from before had been minor. This time he had to be certain nothing would fail. As he prepared for flight, a new signal appeared on the radar: enemy activity, unusual formations approaching fast. David knew the timing was no coincidence. The betrayal had given the enemy an advantage. They knew exactly when and where to strike. He activated the jet's engines and lifted off into the night sky. The base below grew smaller, lights twinkling like distant stars. He felt a mix of excitement and tension. The first wave of enemy fighters appeared over the horizon, more numerous than before, more organized and clearly expecting him. David rolled and climbed, weaving through the clouds as missiles streaked toward him. But something felt different, too easy almost. The enemy's movements were coordinated perfectly, as if they had known his every maneuver. Suddenly it clicked. The betrayal was real. Someone on the inside had given them the jet's flight patterns, its special maneuvers and weaknesses. His heart pounded. This was not just a battle in the sky, it was a trap. The enemy had laid a perfect ambush. But David was not so easily caught. He activated the jet's hidden propulsion systems, accelerating faster than the enemy expected. He executed sharp twists and dives, dodging missiles and outsmarting the fighters. His jet was responding like a living thing, every movement precise, perfect. Below, the base watched in horror as the radar showed David surrounded. Officers shouted, soldiers prayed, and Colonel Matthews clenched his fists. "He's trapped," someone whispered. David's mind raced. He had to identify the source of the betrayal, even while fighting for his life. He recalled the patterns of access, the suspicious behavior he had noticed. A familiar figure flashed in his memory, a senior officer who had seemed overly curious about the jet's capabilities, someone who had questioned every one of David's orders. The realization hit him like lightning: the traitor was inside. With a mix of courage and cunning, David used the jet's most advanced secret feature: an emergency stealth mode that rendered the plane nearly invisible to radar and sensors. The enemy fighters hesitated, confused by the sudden disappearance. Using this advantage, David twisted through the sky, dodging the missiles and closing in on a hidden valley where he believed the traitor had signaled the enemy. The jet landed briefly in a concealed area, and David quickly confronted the officer responsible. The man froze, realizing his betrayal had been discovered. I was only trying to," he stammered, fear replacing arrogance. "You gave them my location," David said, calm but deadly. "Do you understand what you've done?" The officer said nothing. David knew the enemy now had inside information, and the danger was far from over. But at that moment he had uncovered the threat, neutralized the immediate risk, and proved once again that no betrayal, inside or out, could stop him. As he returned to the jet and lifted off once more, David's mind was sharp, aware, and ready. He had survived ambushes, sabotage, and betrayal. The enemy might return, and they might bring even greater forces next time. But he had learned a crucial lesson. Trust was rare, vigilance was everything, and the jet, his secret weapon, was his greatest ally. Back at the base, Colonel Matthews met him as the jet landed safely. His expression was a mix of pride and concern. "Turner, that was incredible. You not only survived but you found the traitor. The jet, and you, are unmatched." David nodded quietly. "They will come again," he said. "Stronger, smarter, but we will be ready." The night was quiet, but the shadows of betrayal lingered. One lesson was clear. In war, danger comes not only from the sky but from the very people you think you can trust. And as David looked at his sleek, black jet, he knew that its story and their battle was far from over. The enemy was watching, planning, and waiting. And David Turner was ready. The sun rose over the secret military base, but its light could not chase away the tension that hung in the air. David Turner stood beside his black, sleek jet, watching the horizon. He had faced enemy missiles, deadly fighters, sabotage, and betrayal. Every challenge had been overcome. But now, intelligence reports warned that the enemy was bringing everything they had, an all-out strike designed to destroy the jet and the base once and for all. Colonel Matthews approached him, face pale but determined. "Turner, they're sending everything. Jets, missiles, artillery, nothing is being held back. This is the final strike. If the jet falls, we could lose everything." David's eyes narrowed. "Then we make sure it doesn't fall," he said calmly. Inside, adrenaline surged. This was the ultimate test. The jet, once laughed at as a toy, was now the key to survival. And David knew he could not fail. The base prepared for battle. Soldiers took positions, engineers loaded defenses, and pilots checked weapons. But all attention focused on the black jet. Its engines purred quietly, waiting, ready to face the impossible. The first wave of enemy fighters appeared on the horizon, faster and more numerous than ever. Behind them, missiles streaked through the sky like burning stars. The base's radar was overwhelmed. Panic whispered through the hangars, but David climbed into the cockpit, heart steady, mind sharp. The jet lifted off smoothly, slicing through the sky with precision. Immediately, enemy missiles locked onto it. David activated the jet's secret propulsion system, a burst of speed that left the first missiles far behind. He rolled and twisted, dodging, climbing, diving, every movement perfect. Each maneuver seemed impossible, but the jet responded flawlessly, almost like an extension of his own body. Enemy fighters tried to surround him, but David anticipated every move. He darted through mountains and clouds, disappearing and reappearing in unpredictable ways. The base watched in awe as the radar showed the impossible. One jet alone outmaneuvering dozens of enemies and hundreds of missiles. Then came the heart of the battle. The enemy launched a massive coordinated attack. Swarms of fighters attacked from all directions, and missile barrages lit up the sky. David knew he could not rely on speed alone. He activated every secret feature of the jet: stealth mode, countermeasures, emergency thrusters. The jet became a shadow, twisting through explosions, dodging every attack with deadly precision. Despite the chaos, David struck back. He used the jet's hidden weapons to disable enemy fighters, sending them spiraling out of control. Missiles exploded in bursts behind him. The enemy was stunned. Their perfect plan had failed. One young pilot and his seemingly impossible jet had turned the tide. Below, the base erupted in cheers. Colonel Matthews shook his head in disbelief. "He's done it, he's done the impossible," he whispered. Engineers and soldiers looked at the sky with awe. The jet, once mocked, had become a legend. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but David's skill and the jet's advanced technology could not be beaten. Every enemy formation broke, Every missile missed and finally the enemy began to retreat. Their ace pilots, some of the best in the world, were forced to withdraw. The sky, once a battlefield, grew calm again. David returned to the base, landing the jet smoothly. Sweat streaked his face, but his expression was calm, proud, and resolute. Soldiers and engineers rushed to him, clapping, cheering, and whispering in awe. Even the pilots who had once mocked him looked on silently, unable to hide their amazement. Colonel Matthews approached, placing a firm hand on David's shoulder. "Turner, today you did more than survive. You saved this base, our people, and proved what was thought impossible. You, and this jet, will be remembered." David looked at the black plane, silent and powerful. Its sleek surface gleamed under the sun, a weapon, a marvel, and a symbol of courage and innovation. "It wasn't just the jet," he said quietly. "It was teamwork, trust, and determination. And we'll need it again, someday." The base celebrated, but David knew this was more than a victory, it was a legacy. The jet, once ridiculed as a toy, had defied every expectation, outsmarted every enemy, and changed the course of war. Its legend would spread, inspiring pilots, engineers, and soldiers alike. And the story of one young pilot who believed in his machine, even when everyone else laughed, would be told for generations. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the mountains, David climbed a small hill overlooking the base. He looked at the horizon where enemy forces had vanished and felt a sense of calm. The battles would come again, he knew that, but for now they had survived. They had triumphed against impossible odds. And in that moment the joke was over. The jet was no longer a secret. It was a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and determination. The world would never underestimate it again. David Turner smiled quietly, eyes fixed on the horizon. He had faced the impossible, survived betrayal, dodged death, and outsmarted the enemy. And together with his secret jet, he had become a legend. The war was far from over, but one thing was certain. When the world mocked the impossible, one determined pilot and his extraordinary jet could change everything. The shadow of the black jet stretched across the base as the stars appeared in the sky, silent, sleek, and unstoppable, a legacy that would never be forgotten.